The slap came so fast I tasted blood before I understood what had happened. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. Minutes earlier, I had been a bride. Then the chapel doors flew open, and by the time military police reached us, I was standing in my wedding dress with a red handprint blooming across my cheek, watching my own mother get walked out in handcuffs while 200 guests sat frozen in their seats. I'm Madison Harper. I hold the rank of captain in the United States Marine Corps, where I serve as a transportation operations officer. For 8 years, I carried one belief like a stone in my chest, that my mother had chosen her grief over me. I thought every letter I sent vanished into a silence she'd built on purpose. I thought the money I quietly wired her every month meant nothing to her because she never once acknowledged it. I thought I had lost her the day I signed my enlistment papers, and that the loss was final. I was wrong about almost all of it. It took a wedding disaster, a federal case, and months of digging through records most people never think to question before I understood exactly how wrong. Here's where the story actually begins, because the slap wasn't the start of anything. It was the end result of a lie that had been building quietly for 20 years when neither my mother nor I knew we were living inside. My father, David Harper, died of cancer when I was 22. The following year, my uncle Michael, my father's younger brother and the Marine I'd worshipped since childhood, was killed overseas during deployment. 2 men I loved gone within 12 months of each other. My mother, Patricia, didn't just grieve, she calcified. Somewhere in that pain, her sorrow turned into something sharper, something aimed squarely at the uniform both men had worn, as if the Marine Corps itself had reached into our family and taken what it wanted. So, when I enlisted, she didn't see courage in it. She saw a third loss already waiting to happen. "You'll end up like your uncle," she told me the night before I shipped out for boot camp, her voice flat with a fear she'd never fully let herself feel. "Coming home under a flag while I bury someone else I love." I told her I understood her fear. Then I left anyway, because I'd learned by then that love sometimes means doing the very thing the people you love can't forgive you for. What followed were 8 years of reaching into darkness and getting nothing back. Letters I assumed went unread. Birthday flowers I assumed went untouched on some porch. Confidently ringing out phone calls every single time until I stopped expecting an answer at all. And every month, without fail, a transfer of money to help her keep the lights on. Because even if she'd stopped loving me, I wasn't going to let her go without. I built a life in the space she'd left empty. I met Major Ethan Walker while running logistics for hurricane relief along the East Coast, coordinating truck convoys and supply drops in the kind of chaos that either breaks people or shows you exactly who they are. Something about his steadiness made me realize how much tension I'd been carrying without noticing. When he proposed, on a beach at low tide with the wind nearly stealing his words, I didn't hesitate for a second. My younger sister, Brooke, stayed close to our mother the whole time, and she became my only window into Patricia's world. "She's not ready, Maddie," Brooke would tell me, almost every time we spoke, "but I'm working on her. She asks about you more than you'd think. Give it time." I believed her. For 8 years, I believed her completely, because why would I doubt the one person who seemed to be building a bridge back to my mother? On the wedding day, hope outweighed my caution for the first time in years. Ethan waited at the altar in his dress blues. I walked past 200 guests and a framed photograph of Uncle Michael that I'd placed near the front in his honor. I wanted him there, in whatever way he could be, on the day I married another Marine, the same way he'd once told me he'd want to be there on the day I married another Marine. We'd barely finished our vows when the doors slammed open. My mother stood there, in black, trembling, and for one absurd second, I let myself believe she'd come to see her daughter married after all these years. Then her eyes found Michael's photograph. "How dare you," she said, crossing the room fast, her heel striking the floor like a countdown. "How dare you use him for this?" Before I could speak, she'd knocked the frame to the floor. Glass scattered across the marble like ice, and the room went so quiet I could hear it settle. "Mom, please," I reached for her, my hands shaking. "Don't touch me." Her voice cracked open, raw, in a way I hadn't heard since my father's funeral. "No daughter of mine wears that uniform. You didn't honor him by putting his picture here. You killed him. You and your father both. And now this life you chose over us." I tried to hold her hands, to bring her back from wherever the grief had taken her. Instead, she pulled free and struck me across the face hard enough that the sound carried to the back pews, hard enough that Ethan was moving before I even registered the sting. Military police arrived within seconds. Because we stood on federal property, this wasn't a family embarrassment anymore. It was a criminal matter, out of my hands the moment it started. I watched them walk my mother out, while Ethan held me upright because my legs had simply stopped cooperating with the rest of me. That night, in a hotel room instead of on a honeymoon, I had every reason to let anger take over completely. My command offered support. Ethan offered to handle the paperwork so I wouldn't have to look at it. Brooke called in tears, saying she never imagined our mother would do something like this, that she was just as blindsided as I was. But one detail kept scratching at the back of my mind, quieter than the anger, more persistent. It wasn't the slap, it was the base access. Camp Lejeune doesn't let visitors wander in off the highway. My mother would have needed a sponsor, someone to put her name on a list days in advance, someone to walk her through the gate past armed checkpoints. That meant this hadn't been a spontaneous outburst from a grieving woman who happened to find her way on a Marine base. Someone had arranged it, deliberately, in advance. I've spent my career trained not to trust a story until the facts hold it up under pressure. So instead of nursing my wounds, I requested the visitor logs the next morning. Ethan found me at 2 a.m, still in my dress, staring at a printout under the desk lamp like it might rearrange itself into something easier to accept. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said gently, sitting beside me. "Someone put her name on that list, Ethan. Someone planned this before I ever said a single vow." He didn't argue, and he didn't try to soften it for me. He just said, "Then let's find out who," and pulled a chair up beside mine. The sponsor name on the log wasn't a stranger. It was Brooke. I sat with that fact for a long time, unwilling to accept it at face value. Brooke was the one who told me to be patient. Brooke was the one supposedly repairing things behind the scenes, one conversation at a time. Why would she be the one who walked our mother onto the base on my wedding day of all days? For a few days, I convinced myself there was an innocent version of events. Maybe Brooke had brought her to talk things through quietly, somewhere private, and it had simply spiraled out of control before anyone could stop it. I nearly closed the investigation right there, relieved to have an explanation that let me avoid something harder underneath it. Then I pulled the bank records, mostly out of habit rather than real suspicion, and the innocent version fell apart in my hands. For 8 years, I'd wired money to support my mother every single month, without missing one. But the account receiving those transfers wasn't in Patricia Harper's name at all. It belonged to Brooke. My mother had nearly lost her house. She'd borrowed from neighbors just to keep the utilities on through more than one winter. None of that made sense if my support had actually reached her, unless it never had, not once, in 8 years. I called the postal service, the phone carrier, old email providers, working the case the way I'd run any operation in uniform, methodically, refusing to let emotion outrun the evidence. What surfaced over the following days took the air out of my lungs. Every letter I'd written had been intercepted before it ever reached her mailbox. Every birthday card redirected somewhere I never traced. Every call blocked by a forwarding request set up years earlier under our mother's name, but tied to Brooke's own number. Fake email accounts, built to look like mine, down to the profile photo, had sent our mother cold, dismissive messages I never wrote, message after message designed to make her believe I'd given up on her. Voicemails I'd left in the middle of the night, half crying, had been deleted before she ever heard them ring. For 8 years, both of us had believed the other one had simply stopped caring. Neither of us had. The next discovery cut even deeper. Property records showed Brooke had obtained power of attorney over our mother's finances 3 years earlier without my knowledge, and it seemed without our mother truly understanding what she'd signed in the middle of her grief. Using that authority, Brooke had refinanced our mother's fully paid-off house and pulled the equity out in cash advances that vanished into her own mounting debt. Default notices were already sitting in a drawer somewhere, unopened. The house our father had spent his whole working life paying off had been one missed payment away from foreclosure. I sat with Ethan on our back porch one evening not long after, papers spread across the table between us like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish assembling. Why would she do this to her own mother? I asked him, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. People rarely set out to destroy someone they love, he said, choosing his words slowly. They usually start by trying to survive something on their own, and they tell themselves the lie is temporary, just until things get better. Until one day, it isn't temporary anymore, and there's no clean way back. Further digging explained the desperation underneath it all. Brooke's boutique had failed years earlier, quietly, without either of us ever hearing the full story. Personal loans had piled on top of the failure. Gambling debt had grown past anything she could manage on her own, spiraling in a way she was too proud or too afraid to admit to either of us. Keeping my mother and me apart hadn't begun as cruelty for its own sake. It began as a way to protect her only reliable source of money from two people who might eventually compare notes and expose the whole arrangement. The last piece came from an unlikely place. I went to my mother's attic looking for old photographs to bring to the assault hearing, something to humanize her before the court. And behind a stack of boxes, I found a cedar chest that had belonged to Uncle Michael. Inside were his letters, his medals folded in cloth, and a single DVD labeled simply, "For my family before I deploy." I watched it alone that night, sitting on the attic floor with my knees pulled up to my chest. Michael, 26 years old, smiling in his dress blues, said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "If one of my nieces ever decides to wear this uniform," he said, looking straight into the camera like he somehow knew I'd be the one watching, "tell her I'll be the proudest man in this family. Tell her I'll be saluting her from wherever I end up." 20 years of my mother's grief had rested on the belief that Michael would have seen my enlistment as a betrayal of his memory, as one more loss stacked on top of the ones she'd already survived. That belief had shaped every argument, every silence, every year we lost to a misunderstanding neither of us had chosen. It had never been true, not for a single day. When the federal hearing finally arrived, I made a choice that surprised nearly everyone in that courtroom, myself included. I didn't ask the court to come down hard on my mother. I asked for the chance to lay out everything I'd found, in order, so the truth could stand on its own. Standing before the judge in my dress uniform, I presented 8 years of intercepted mail, blocked calls, redirected financial support, a hidden power of attorney, and a refinanced home. Every single thread leading back to one person. My mother didn't hit me because she hates me. She hit me because she was lied to for 20 years by someone we both trusted completely. I'm not asking this court for revenge. I'm asking for the truth to be on the record so my mother can finally hear it too. Prosecutors followed with bank surveillance images showing Brooke making the deposits herself, property filings bearing her signature on the refinancing paperwork, and digital trails linking the fake email accounts directly back to her personal devices. There was nothing left for her to explain away, no version of events that still protected her. My mother sat in that courtroom and heard for the first time in 20 years the recorded voice of a man long gone, dismantled the belief she'd built her entire identity around. She wept, not from anger this time, but from something closer to grief for all the years the lie had cost her, and something closer to relief that it was finally over. The court accepted my request for compassion toward my mother, recommending counseling instead of punishment, recognizing that decades of grief and calculated manipulation had shaped her actions far more than any malice of her own ever had. Brooke's case moved forward separately into financial fraud proceedings that would take much longer to resolve, proceedings that would finally force her to account, piece by piece, for what she'd taken and from whom. Healing didn't arrive all at once, and I never expected it to. My mother started grief counseling that same month. She watched Michael's recording more than once, understanding a little more of herself each time, seeing clearly how much of her pain had been built on a lie instead of a fact. I visited her every week after that, not to erase 8 lost years in a single afternoon, but to lay down something honest in their place. One conversation at a time. 1 year later, Ethan and I renewed our vows in a small backyard ceremony with only close family present. No chapel, no crowd, just the people who mattered. Before the ceremony began, my mother placed the veil over my head herself, her hands steady in a way I hadn't seen since before my father got sick. "I should have asked more questions," she said quietly, adjusting the veil with careful fingers. "I'm sorry it took a courtroom for me to finally see what was right in front of me the whole time." "You see it now," I told her, taking her hands in mine. "That's what matters most to me." During the reception, we played Michael's recording quietly for everyone gathered under the string lights. I watched my mother close her eyes and listen, finally at peace with a truth she should have known all along, a truth that had been sitting in a cedar chest the entire time, waiting for someone to look. If this story reached something in you, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales so you don't miss the next story about families who lose each other in silence and somehow find the courage to come back through nothing but the truth. Sometimes the person who hurts us isn't the villain of the story at all. There's someone else's victim too, carrying a wound we never knew to look for. Truth takes patience to uncover, and reconciliation takes courage to accept once it's finally in front of you. But both are always worth pursuing, even after years of silence have convinced you otherwise. The real value in this story is the reminder that assumption can do quieter, deeper damage to a family than any single act of anger ever could. It teaches the importance of verifying before condemning, of questioning silence instead of simply accepting it as rejection, and of recognizing that financial exploitation of grieving or elderly parents is a real and serious harm, one that often hides behind a mask of loyalty and family devotion. It highlights why families should keep financial oversight transparent, especially where an aging parent's assets and legal authority are involved, and it shows the healing that becomes possible when truth and accountability are chosen over blind assumption or bitter revenge. Above all, it's a reminder that even after years of pain and misunderstanding, understanding and forgiveness remain within reach for anyone willing to look a little closer before giving up on the people they love.